So, good evening everyone. The clock is 6 and we are ready to start this interesting debate about the labor market in Europe and the challenges we have ahead. It seems like in most countries in Europe there's a huge challenge of getting skilled labor and getting labor at all. We have this discussion in Denmark all the time. I'm spending a lot of time about this discussion because I'm mayor of Copenhagen with the responsibility for labor and integration, but also in the rest of Denmark there is a huge lack of skilled labor. Many areas can't find labor, and especially in the welfare area it's very difficult to find people. And we're going to discuss if that's the same situation in other countries in Europe and what we can do in order to solve that challenge, because it's important for our welfare state and also for our overall economy that we have skilled labor and enough people both for private business but also for the welfare area. And today with us we have representatives both from government and parliaments and big business. First we have Mikael Ekman, who's Director of Policy and Strategy at Microsoft. We have Gatis Iglitis from the Latvian government, Minister of Welfare. And we have Kim Valentin, member of the Danish Parliament for Venstre and spokesperson for European Affairs. But I would like to start with Mikael Ekman, how you see the situation seen from Microsoft, where you for sure need skilled labor and where you are part of the competition about attracting people to your company and to the IT sector. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And I love this backdrop. It's very fitting for a Saturday evening discussion. You're right. We are a fairly large company, both globally but actually also in Denmark. We have about 1,000 people sitting in our headquarters in Lund. And we're dependent on access to talent. And what we see both in our shop, but also when we talk to Danish businesses across the board, and I think this will be true for Europe more broadly, is that access to labor is becoming one of the biggest challenges that companies face. Most recent study I saw, 80% of Danish IT companies point to access to labor as the biggest barrier for their future growth. This is a real problem. It's not something just IT companies face, it's something all sectors face. And I think finding ways to solve that will be one of the biggest, I think, social welfare challenges we'll have to face in the coming years. I personally hope it will be a big part of the national elections we'll have here in Denmark soon, as well as the debate we'll do. So it's, I would say, top of mind for businesses across the board.
Thank you very much. And then I'll give the floor to Gatis Iglitis from Latvia. And I think it used to be in Denmark that when we have this discussion about where to find labor, we will say Latvia, Estonia, Poland. But that's not the case anymore. It's not so easy as it used to be. And I'm pretty sure you also feel some of the same challenges in Latvia as we do here in Denmark.
Absolutely. This is a good, thank you for inviting me. This is a good comparison. 10 years ago, indeed, it was the case. Baltic people, Polish, Romanians, they were looking for job opportunities in the West Europe, Ireland, UK, Germany, Denmark. But now with the convergence of incomes, of course, the attractiveness has diminished. And now actually these countries, Poland, Baltics, we are now welcoming people from, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, Belarus, where income levels are lower. So, I mean, we live in a united market basically, and there's always competition for brain, for skilled people. That's the reality.
Thank you. And Kim Valentin, we just briefly said that we're going to have elections in Denmark within 1 year. Maybe sooner than later. Do you think that would be a theme in the the election campaign, the lack of labor and what we should do in the future?
I hope so. I hope so, yes. Because this is more than a labor market problem, challenge. This is actually an economic problem, a growth problem for Europe. And I think that I'm also the vice chair of the Danish Finance Committee. And I think this will be a big theme in the Danish budget law for this year, how to create more jobs and to get the right people to take the jobs. If you look at this in a European perspective, I travel a lot around Europe, and the further south I get in Europe, I must say, the more difficult it is to understand this problem. And I think that the governments of the south of Europe have greater problems than in the north of Europe. I was in Paris not so long ago, and in Paris they have a retirement plan for some of the workers that are 55 years old. 55 years old. And they tried to change this just 2 years ago. Macron tried to change this, and there was big demonstrations in France. And some of the workers' unions actually understood the problem, and they tried to tell the workers that we need to change it. And the workers went to the union and cut all the power, cut all the gas, closed down the union. This is amazing that there's not a more understanding of the problem and the source of the problem, because this is really a big problem for Europe, not to have skilled labor and that we don't work more than to 55 or 60 years, some parts of Europe, and some sectors. But I think I have worked with retirement plans for people for 30 years in my company, and I think in Denmark there's a big understanding of this, and we have worked with this in our reforms over the last 20 years. So a lot of governments in Europe look to Denmark for the solutions. I think that's right. But if we look to other parts of Europe, there's another problem that hasn't been solved, and that's how to do savings for retirement. In Denmark, we save in actual savings. We have the money and we put it into private accounts. If you look at other parts of Europe, it's actually it's not in the books. So if you look in France, actually the money you look forward to having in your private savings, they're not in the books anyway. It's the state who is guaranteed. So it's quite a big problem, because it's the young generation paying for the older generations. And if the young generations are smaller than the older generations, you have a big problem. So they try to solve it by saying you have to work 5 years more or 2 years more or whatever. And this is a really big problem for some of the greater economies in Europe. Then we have a problem with mobility, because some parts of Europe actually have a greater unemployment rate than we have in Denmark, much greater, and youngsters in Europe have a much higher unemployment rate. But they don't want to move for jobs. We need to work with that. I think we need to work with that over Europe as a whole. And we need to be more flexible on that within EU. And the last problem is we also need more mobility in education. We need to be more focused on having education through your whole life. You need to be aware that perhaps you're not living just in Denmark, you're not only working with what you like when you're young. You have to have a new education when you are 40, because that's what the job market needs. And I don't think people in Europe actually understand that properly yet, but we have to discuss it, and we have to work with it across the borders. So this is national reforms we need all over Europe, also in Denmark, but not so much in Denmark, but especially in southern Europe, but also in big parts of the Eastern European countries. Sorry it took so long time, but I've been using a lot of time on this.
But you also provide a solution for the problem.
Yes.
So it's given the. If I may ask you, Michael Ekman, what are you doing in Microsoft to attract people to work in Denmark? Because in Denmark we have the work record in taxes, I guess. It's quite expensive to live here. There's also a language barrier. So what are the selling points when you want to attract people to move to Denmark and to work here and pay taxes and be part of our society?
Yeah. I think, to be honest, we Microsoft, we're pretty fortunate in a couple of ways. One probably is that we're a big company, fairly well-known brand, so we are lucky that a lot of people wouldn't mind working for Microsoft. The second is we don't actually find it that difficult to get people attracted to come to Copenhagen. I think at least in the sector that we are in, IT and technology, I think people understand that Denmark is a pretty cool place to be. We're the most digitalized country in the world. In our office we have a quantum lab. Why do we have that? We have that because we have the highest amount of quantum PhDs in the world per capita. So I think those two things are pretty fortunate. But unfortunately as well, the fact is that if there is not enough talent and people to do the work out in the companies, our customers, but also the partners we work with, it doesn't matter. Then we can't get business done, we can't get anywhere. So I think attracting labor from outside is one part of the solution. And now I hate to be that annoying tech guy that points to technology, but I have to, because I actually think technology is the other part of the solution, or at least a other part of the solution. I do think that if we are smarter about how we use technology in Denmark, we can actually stretch the smart heads and the warm hands that we are missing. Just one example is in the healthcare sector, which I'm sure will be a big part of the debate when the election comes. We're missing a bunch of nurses, we're missing a bunch of doctors, we're missing radiologists, so the people that actually scan you for breast cancer and broken pelvises and so forth. You look at kind of the trend, that gap between the amount of work that has to be done and the number of radiologists getting educated is growing by 9% every year, the data shows. But luckily we can use technology smart, we can use artificial intelligence, scans, image scans to try and help the radiologists make faster and more accurate decisions. In fact, we actually have a very, very cool Danish startup called Radiobotics that does that exact job, so there's also an export potential. This is just one example, I could mention many more, but I think technology is part of the solution.
So is that a solution we can apply already now, or does it need some kind of improvements before we get it plug and play that solution?
I think the technology is getting there. I think there is important ethical discussions. When you talk about healthcare, I think there's regulation. I would love to see politicians, both at the national Danish level, but also at EU level, really push for this in an ethical and responsible way, but try and see, okay, how can we actually use technology to solve some of the labor shortage problems we have. I think it can benefit the patients, in this case, I think the citizens in general, and also the broader society.
Thank you. And if we go further to Latvia, you said in your introduction that in the 90s and in the beginning of this century, a lot of Latvians, they moved up from Latvia to work. What do you do today to make them come back to Latvia? Because as far as I remember, the numbers, the Latvian population has been shrinking during the years, and it's a small country, it's getting smaller. So what do you do to make the Latvians move back to Latvia?
Indeed, our demographics situation is probably one of the worst in the world. If you look at the decline in the last 20-25 years, Latvia, Lithuania, we have had the sharpest decrease in population, both for natural reasons, people dying more than are born, and also for outward migration. In the last 5 or so years, the migration factor has evened out. So basically, it's more or less balanced. The same number of people leaving, and then the same number of people coming to live in Latvia. And we have seen a lot of businesses, especially in high-tech sector like IT services. Not maybe yet the most advanced IT services. They are very often Scandinavian companies which are starting. Well, basically they are putting their back office services in the Baltics. But that's a good starting point on which to build sort of more sophisticated services. And with this, of course, the salary levels are also become attractive. You know, a normal IT guy in Riga, you know, probably earns 3,000–4,000 euros. I don't know in that's in krona, but that's a good salary for the cost of living. It's much higher, much lower than in Copenhagen. You can actually have a good life, a good quality of life with that amount. And of course, that is also even more attractive to people from Belarus, Ukraine, from India, and so we are becoming attractive. These are maybe certain sectors, and these are mostly foreign capital companies, like big names. There's one Accenture, for instance, also Microsoft, and so on. So that's one way to get to higher salaries, to attract talent. Of course, I mean there are a lot of things to be fixed. I mean immigration policies, for instance. Childcare for those who come with families, and so on. But I think we are getting there. And some cities are more successful. In Baltics, we see Vilnius, for instance, Lithuania. They are very successful in pulling talent from the region and also further apart. And with that, of course, they can climb up the value chain. In their services, in their products, and of course with that higher salaries, higher quality of life.
Thank you. So we also have the opportunity to take some questions from the audience.
Otherwise, I can.
Yeah, otherwise, while you're thinking of, then Kenny can take the floor.
Yes, because the ball was played over to the politicians,
Yes.
I think.
That's
fair enough. I like to play it back again, a little. Because I think that tech is part of the solution. I'm quite sure in certain areas that's a big part of the solution. Let me just mention welfare tech, which is a very important part of the future. I don't know is that exactly what you mean, but I think welfare tech is a big part of the solution in the health sector for elderly people. I think that welfare tech will be used to fill out the gaps. And it's not more than 3 or 4 years ago, I was in Norway, where they had a solution with home. People could stay at home practically rest of their life until they die, because everything was surveyed. So if the patient had a low heart rate, a voice would say, you have a low heart rate, go to the door. Or if the bed was wet through the night, the patient will be alarmed, or they'll be called a service employer to help change everything. So this is some of the solutions that welfare tech actually can do to solve some of the problems in the labor market. But the problem is that a lot of people are not educated to use the tech, or the people who should be supplied the tech is not ready to handle it, because there's a social angle to this too. To meet people is actually important for elderly people. So if they don't meet people because they have no family or fewer family, or they live a long way from home, then they need to see people through the day. And how do we do that together with this welfare tech? That's actually not been solved. because it's not the same talking to a television. We know that from the Corona period, that it is to actually have a visitor, sit down, drink a cup of coffee, to ease up, perhaps just touch. Human touch is important to people. So this is actually not something that tech can solve. And of course you can make robots today from dogs or cats or even people, but it's not the same. So this is not solved with tech alone, but it can solve some problems, but it can't solve every problem.
Can I, of course, just briefly, I think spot on. Although there are maybe situations where you actually prefer that it's not a human. I was had a debate at the Folkemøde in Bornholm, where Claus Jensen from Danish Metal kept going on about toilets and how you can get robot toilets now. That's actually a more convenient way of getting help. So, side note. What I wanted to say is, I think it's not about taking out the personal side of the service or the social helper that comes out or the nurse, but it's about making sure they can use their time on that. So trying to take away all the other stuff that takes up time, administrative burdens, time spent in front of a computer. If you do that smarter, and I think you can, then you can actually maximize the time that really matters next to the patient or whatever it might be. Can I say one example? Yes. It's just an aspect we haven't discussed that much, and that is one part of the, I think, solution is to get people to do more when they are, or do the right thing when they are at the job. But another part of it is to get the people, and there's not that many in Denmark, but there are some that are outside the labor market today, get them into work. And that's where I think a company like Microsoft has a big role to play as well. So actually we've been working with your organization in the municipality in the city of Copenhagen to try and take some of the training courses we have that we know is in high demand in the IT sector, and we give them for free to some of the job seekers that your organization tries to help into the labor market. And we've done that with pretty big success. We do it in Aarhus as well. Another example is a collaboration we have with a great Danish NGO called Ready School. They're specialized in training refugee and migrant women that comes to Denmark. They can't get a job because they don't speak the language or they don't have the necessary thing on the CV. And they take a quick course, and we can actually see that when they've done that, they get a certification and they're much more attractive and they pretty quickly get into jobs. So this is about also expanding the overall labor force, which I think is important.
Yes, I think you're quite right about this. And I think actually one of the things we learned from the Corona period, that is if we join up and sit down and talk about the things, we can actually solve them quicker. So I think this is an area where we could use the frame of Team Europe. This is actually something we only can solve if we're together about it. So Team Europe will be taking all the big companies, even the finance companies and across border politicians, perhaps not only the government, also the parliaments can be involved in this solution that should be cross-border. That's why I said from the start of, this is about mobility. We can't solve it only in one country or two countries. We need to solve it in Europe together. And that's why Team Europe could be interested here.
Do you want to add something?
No, I think COVID period was mentioned. I think it was revolutionary in a sense. For instance, in my country and probably others, we've seen digital transformation progressing at least 5-10 years than it would take a normal sort of space if it wasn't COVID, for instance, all these Zooms and Webex and distant work, which I think is actually which has led to huge transformation of the workplace as such, but I would say in a good way, and also thinking more about the quality of life, how much we can actually spend at work, not being on a bus or a metro or in a car, and actually thinking about how we feel, quality of life, and I think it's very important. Yeah.
So we have a question from the audience.
I agree that it's very relevant to try to solve the solution within Europe, trying to attract young people from south of Europe to the north, or to use artificial intelligence to solve some of the health problems. But do we, like in Latvia, we need to talk about migration more than we do today? It's been very discussed in Danish politics, but that's but yeah, we need to talk more about it. We need to address it, because that might also be one of the solutions.
Yes, I think migration internally in EU is very important. I think we are much too reluctant to look at this as a solution. When I talk to people in the parliament or even in other parliaments, they are not open for a broader discussion on this, because they say we have tried it, people don't want it, or something similar. And I think that the problem today is much deeper than it was 10 years or 20 years ago. So I think people are much more open-minded for a solution if we can give them a life that is good. People are looking for lives that are good. So I know that because I've worked with it for 30 years. And if you can present a plan that actually can give people an education, a saving plan, something to look forward to. There's a lot of people living in other countries that would prefer to live in Denmark, I'm sure of. But you have to present a total plan. You cannot just say, oh, come to Denmark and work in the health sector. They won't do that. You have to do something more like you're mentioning here. You have to present something. This is actually a solution that covers the whole Europe, like a tech solution, which also involves the governments in the countries, the administration. You have to present an idea, a vision for Europe. And I think if we do that, I think that the people will join. And we can open the minds of a lot of young people who have lost their visions, because they have been unemployed for years now in South of Europe. And we can open our minds for people who are getting obsolete in jobs and educations all over Europe because of the transformation of the world. And open up and say, there's a future for you if you take this education, but we need to take hands on this problem. And take this as part of the problem. Part of the solution.
Maybe also.
Sorry, not a part of the problem. Part of the solution.
Don't tweet that, please.
So if we continue with the issue of immigration, my impression is that the Latvian society is rather reluctant to immigration, and the question about Latvian language has been very important in your society, especially after the independence. And now you're talking about that you are attracting labor from Russia, from Belarus, from Ukraine, places where they speak Russian, which has been problematic in the Latvian society.
Yeah.
Is there a change now due to the lack of labor, or
I must say, I've lived also in Belgium, in Brussels, for 11 years, and I know that the Belgians, for instance, Belgium in 60s, 70s, they had also economic problems. They needed workforce, you know. So they imported a lot of workers from Morocco, Algeria, basically Arab countries, and of course, you know, many of them stayed. Their families came, and so on. And in these 50 years, there's a lot of them basically settled settled down. You know, they became part of the society. Similarly, I think also like Sweden, they also opened a lot of. They're very open. They were at least at some point very open to immigration as a solution to economic challenges. You know, but this is not what we would pursue. You know, this kind of solution. We would rather sort of go for selective, you know, in a way, only allow immigration, which is basically of a higher value, so to say, in the workplaces. And we have a special law, immigration law, which stipulates that if you want to bring in an employee from abroad, first of all, you have to pay 1.5 times of the average salary, and plus then additional criteria. So we don't want to open our gates and, you know, flood in with workers just because we have maybe a need in certain sectors. We are, let's say, very cautious about this. A lot has changed now because of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, because now basically we have a lot of Ukrainians who come to Latvia, Baltics. They want to do the job. They are very hardworking, and let's face it, they are also ready to work maybe for a lower salary than for locals.
So there was a question. Yeah, please take the floor.
I'm sorry, I hope you will hear me. It's kind of common, but also when we're talking about the like lack of labor and people coming to let's say Denmark and working in a tech industry, and you have many people abroad who are actually skilled and have the skill set to actually like apply for jobs, and then you also think about that sometimes maybe they do have spouses and a family
I can just add just anecdotal to what you say. Not surprisingly, I agree with everything. I've sat with these ladies that we help skill. I mean, the most inspiring, tough, brave women. Some of them have come with their husbands because of jobs. Some of them have fled from Pakistan, from India, from Afghanistan, from other places. The only thing they want to do is get a shot, and they're super ambitious. It's not just I should get a job. It's like I want to go here. This is my career plan. This is what I want to be. But they just need someone to take them seriously, and believe in them, and then give them some opportunities to actually get that thing on the resume that opens the next door. So for some at least, it can be a way for them.
So if it's just for a second step out of my role as moderator and return to being mayor of Copenhagen, then I fully agree what you're saying, and I think we've seen a bit of shift now with the Ukrainians coming to Denmark, because now we are actually allowed to offer them English courses instead of Danish courses, and what they need in order to get out to the labor market is English courses, because if they work in a hotel or in cleaning or whatever, the language is English anyway, it's not English. And if they hopefully are going to return back to Ukraine, they can use English, but they don't have much to use Danish for in Ukraine. So I think this whole thing with Ukrainians coming to Denmark has changed a bit of our mindset, and it will hopefully also change the job centers and how we are working with these kind of issues. And I fully agree that what you're doing with Ready School and the other projects is really amazing, and I think all municipalities should do that as well, because it's really moving people with some concrete tools. So thank you very much. Do you have more questions?
I don't know if you're allowed to call a friend or anything, but I accidentally happened to stand next to Lars here on the second row down by another stage, and we got to talking a little bit. And I don't know if you're up for it, but you said some things that I found was really interesting in terms of your own experiences as a company, not being able to get labor and how you deal with that. Just
yes, I can explain that. I am an employee of a small company in south of Zealand, and we have lack of very knowledge, experienced employees, and we have people now from Germany.
Can you hear in the back? No. Because I think we need to use a microphone.
Yes, what I have explained before, I'm working for...
I think you should have it. Just a
bit closer.
Yeah.
Little bit more closer.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. What I have tried to explain together with Michael, I have explained I'm working for a small company in south of Zealand. We call it Lolland, out of Denmark, and we're looking for very skilled personnel to work for us. We cannot get it. So we have today people from Germany, we have from Poland, we have from Ukraine, we also have people from Russia to work for us. But still we have a lack of experience, knowledge of working. So we have a big problem south of Zealand to get the people that have the right education, something to look at. Of course, we are very happy for these workers we have from other countries, but still we need to learn them everything. And we need to talk German language, we need to talk the English language. Many of them do only understand the small parts of this, what is coming from Poland, Ukraine and Russia. So I have only one question. Which way can we educate these people in a better way so we can use this powerful skills we have? The people are working very well, and we only need to have a better understanding of the Danish market.
Yes, well, you hit the head of the nail, I think we call it. I think that there's a big difference between people coming who lacks basic skills, and then people coming who need just to brush up their education because they have a skill. They just need to brush it up so that it fits to the Danish labor market. And I think that we should be prepared for both. And we should be prepared for both because the Danish labor market has exactly the same problems. That we have the same problems with our own labor market because a lot of people actually don't have the skills to be in the market for labor if we look 10, 20, 30 years ahead. So in Denmark, we need to reform the education system so we can take hand of this problem. And we cannot do that without help from companies. So I think it's a public task to perform on the basic skills and on the brush up of the educations they come with from abroad. Let me just take an example. There comes a nurse from Ukraine. She cannot go directly into the Danish health system. We need to be very good at taking this nurse at once she comes into Denmark and brush it up and send her out in the Danish health system with this brush up. If a guy comes without anything but perhaps 6 years in school, no English, nothing else, it's another task. We need to put him into the school again, put in some basic knowledge, and have a company helping with some kind of educational plan from the company, because they also need to be they need to make money to live from. We can't start from the bottom up. We need to have an educational plan from the start off until 2 or 3 years ahead, which you can provide, or you can provide. So this is a new task for the job centers in Denmark, which we actually just proposed. My party just proposed that we look at the job centers in a whole new way, so we can handle this kind of problems.
No, I think that's some really good points. I think it's partly the responsibility of the companies, your company, my company, to help that education. Something we have to work very hard on, which we are. I mean, and in some company it might be one set of skills, another company another set of skills. At least when it comes to technology and IT, I think that's a never-ending journey. What you could do yesterday, you need to relearn because it's different tomorrow.
Yeah.
I would like to ask a question for the debate on the technology and the elder service, because I do agree very much, but do we need a debate on the expectations from the relatives in that discussion? Because I think it's not easy to provide it if we don't want it, or if the relatives don't want it. So how do we handle that?
Well, I can say we are now out of my comfort zone in politics. But I can say that, because I'm not the spokesperson on this matter, but I can say that it's very important to take care of the relatives when we are talking about elderly people. For instance, the dementia is more about relatives actually in day-to-day handling of the sick old people, elderly people, and I think that we actually need to have a discussion. That's what I can agree about, but I can't present a new solution because I'm not the spokesperson on this.
But maybe our friends in the tech business can provide a solution, because we spend so much time in Denmark talking about warm hands in contradiction to the cold hands, the bureaucrats, the tech, and so on. How do we convince people about that tech can also be warm hands?
This seems like a very political question for a minister and a parliamentarian to answer. But what I would just say, I personally, I don't know if this is Microsoft, this is my opinion. I don't think technology should be warm hands. I think warm hands should be warm hands. I think technology, my point is technology can help make sure that the nurse, who has 1,000 different things to do, can spend most of his or her time by the bed or doing the home call or whatever it is with the patient, instead of sitting and doing time-consuming administrative work in front of a computer. I know that there are systems that have gotten a lot of criticism because the doctors didn't like them, the nurses didn't like them. But there's also systems and studies and experiences that show that it actually makes sense. And I think, I guess that's the point I would make. I think sometimes we tend to think about technology as cold and robotic and something we want to keep out of healthcare. I think actually in some cases, several cases, many cases, it can actually improve the patient experience. One example is, and I don't know if this is an English term, but patients with colic, so problems breathing, these kind of things, for them it tends to be a very strenuous experience having to go to the hospital, getting checked up, getting measured. There is technology today that can do that from the distance. So from the comfort of your home, you can now have a certified doctor look at your data and say, oh, we need to adjust something here. Same with diabetes and other things. So I think that can actually improve the welfare and the safety and the feeling good if you're a patient. But technology is not all hands per se.
I agree also that I think primarily, if it's possible, social care should be organized in the home environment, especially for elderly, and that's what we are trying to do, develop these services with the municipalities, basically, because they are daily in contact with these families through social services or whatever, and we should have good services so that they don't have to go to these elderly homes institutions, which are sometimes called because there are a lot of people and maybe the type of service is not easy to maintain a good level, and also sometimes the infrastructure is of poor quality, at least in my country, and but also I agree definitely that technology is there to help lessen the burden of works that can be done by technology, and so that the social care worker, the medical care worker, whatever, they can focus primarily giving their warmth and being in contact with the person.
Yes, may I just say that this is all very good, but this will not solve anything if the Europeans are not prepared to work longer and to educate themselves more and to move for jobs much more than they do today.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Otherwise, I would like to try to sum up this debate, because I promised Kim that we will end a little bit earlier, because you have to catch a ferry boat in Aarhus to get back to Zealand, to your constituency, and the elections can come pretty soon. So I think it's better you are at home with your electorate. So I don't want you to miss the ferry boat. I think that would be a bad sign for the elections. So if we start with you, and then we can take a small round to sum up.
Yes, well, I apologize. It now became way too much about technology. I actually didn't want it to be that, but I do think that's at least part of the solution. And by the way, it's also part of the solution. Part of the solution, if we want to get as many people as we can into the European labor force, to have better jobs, less physically straining jobs, so hopefully they can also stay a little bit longer in the labor force in the years to come.
What my experience shows is in Europe you will always have countries which are super competitive, which have good education systems, which have good training systems, which are by nature competitive, and Denmark is definitely one of them. You know, Netherlands, Finland, and a few others. And then you have countries which are not competitive and which have a lot of things to fix, including, as I said, education. Also, the labor markets are functioning poorly, high unemployment. High mismatch in education versus what is needed in labor markets. So that's the reality. You know, we live in a union where there are 27 very different countries, and of course there's some natural movement of labor towards more competitive countries, which can also afford to give better salaries, better working conditions. There are side effects, of course. Those countries which are sort of exporters of labor, sometimes they are left, you know, with the brain drain. Not only brain drain, but also hands drain. You know, because some of these sectors, you know, they are in deficit. You know, even like for instance construction, which is not high tech or whatever, but in some of the countries, you know, there's no one to do construction work because they have left to Germany or Scandinavia or elsewhere. So that's the reality. But I think Denmark is in a good place. Let's say that's my conclusion.
That's a very nice conclusion.
Kim? Yes, and my hope is that we will start to look at Europe as one labor market within the next 10-20 years. I know it's difficult, but I think this is a good way to think solutions, and that's why I'm mentioning Team Europe. And I think we should team up in Europe to solve this, because if we don't do it, we will not have the growth. We will not be Europe. We will not be in head of all the world within 20-30 years. We need to team up to solve this. And we have the workforce in Europe. We just need education, we need mobility. And I think that the companies are ready. We can hear that we have 2 companies, perhaps more, that are ready to be a part of the solution, not the whole solution. But that's a political problem. We'll solve the political side. So we have a total solution, and I mentioned it. We need to work more, we need to educate more, we need to move more.
Thank you. And thank you to the rest of you. I think it's been an interesting debate, and I think it's also the whole point of this meeting here in Maya, that we meet across Europe, we discover that we have the same challenges, we also talking about the same solutions actually, and we can learn from each other, and that's important, and also that we can team up in partnerships with private business and across state and municipality. I think that's very important, and one of the reasons why we have this meeting here in Maya. So once again, thank you very much, and also thank you for showing up here tonight and making some good questions as well. So thank you very much.